Welcome to Frazier and Deeter's Culture of Compliance podcast series, where we discuss compliance as a competitive advantage in today's marketplace. I'm Sabrina Serafin, partner and national leader of Frazier and Deeter's process, risk, and governance practice. Today, we're talking to Jack Healey, the CEO of Bear Hill Advisory Group, a firm that provides business risk management and rescue services. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Sabrina.
So, can you talk us through rescue services and what that means to the business community?
Sure. So what Bear Hill Advisory Group helps companies with is the risk that confronts them on a daily basis. And it's usually the unexpected risk. So in the context of today, it's cybersecurity risks. It also involves ethical and bad acts, what to do when a member of management or a board member acts inappropriately, the types of things that management should do, and the crisis management that goes along with that.
So you mentioned cybersecurity, and business risk management is part of your world. So how does cyber intersect with enterprise risk management or information security?
Sure. As enterprise risk management envelops the entire company. It has to do with all the risks that an organization may encounter. It's the risks that are inherent inside their business model, which businesses try to mitigate and get down to the residual risks that they're willing to accept. Cybersecurity is a subset of that. It has to do with the data and the electronic form, and is actually a subset of the information risk, which is all information and data that a company encounters.
I'm going to ask you a question that I hear almost daily, but isn't cybersecurity really the responsibility of IT?
It's interesting, Sabrina, that you brought that up, because most of the people that pull our firm into their companies are the chief information security officers. And it's because they hear that from their associates, that IT isn't my problem, it's your problem. But the biggest risk within a business are the people. And so we're the ones that encounter the risk, and either we recognize that as a risk and we mitigate it at the starting point, or we don't and it becomes IT's problem. The whole idea behind cybersecurity is to make it everybody's problem. It's all of management. In fact, an effective cybersecurity incident response plan will include all members of senior management and the frontline management to help mitigate that risk.
So what would you call some of the misconceptions executive management, board of directors, and even in larger organizations, audit committees have about cybersecurity?
So I'll start with management. First, of course, you just named it. It's not my problem. It's IT's problem. The second is that we're too small. Nobody wants our stuff. And what they don't understand is the thieves aren't looking for your stuff in particular. What they do is they go along, and it's like the thief that walks down the street and he jiggles every doorknob. And the doorknob that is unlocked is the one they walk in. They don't know what's inside the house. They just know you left your door unlocked. So that's a second misconception. A third is that they're just too small to do anything about it. That we don't have the layers of management. They'll read some of the protocols that have come out, and they don't realize there are a lot of protocols for small business. When it comes to the board of directors need to understand that their role isn't to manage the cybersecurity risk, but to have the strategy in place that will manage that risk. And they need to ask management who is responsible for cybersecurity. So boards believe that management has it handled. In many cases, they don't. The last statistic I saw is 40% of large companies had a cyber incident response plan, but only 20% of smaller companies did. And then when you get down to the audit committee, this risk is falling on the audit committee. Very few businesses have implemented a specific cybersecurity risk, and I think that's appropriate. Most of enterprise risk management will fall to the audit committee. So audit committee members are torn between how much time to spend on this risk. Audit committee responsibilities over the last 10 years keep expanding. So how much time do they have to spend to this risk, and how much technical expertise do they need on their board to deal with this risk? I serve on public company boards, and when I first came on, I was the financial statement expert. That's what they wanted. I'm a CPA and a certified fraud examiner, and that's what they wanted. Over time, though, I've also become their cybersecurity expert. So those are some of the problems that the organizations are dealing with.
So would you consider the first step for an organization to evaluate the risks present to be a cyber risk assessment?
Absolutely. The first step is to understand what your risk is. And there's actually a process that you go through. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a subset of the United States Department of Commerce, and its nickname is NIST, came out with a set of protocols. And they walk you through the steps. And the first step that you walk through is, what is the risk? What elements do we have? What assets do we have? What are we trying to protect? So they walk you through a process, and the first thing is to identify those steps. And then once we identify them, we look at what we're doing to protect those assets. And then once we've gotten comfortable with protecting, then we look at what we do to detect if we have a problem, and then, of course, how to respond to that, and then how to recover. So understanding your risks are the first step. And that's not done in a vacuum. That's not IT. That's not finance. It's not HR. It's the entire management team looking at their area of responsibility. So finance, for example, may have risks that are associated with their third parties, the banks that they do business with, their credit card companies, whoever else that they transmit data to. The HR group, of course, has a number of third parties. They have their benefits provider, payroll provider. And I've worked with one of the large payroll firms, and most of the times that they get a call that says, hey, you've been breached, the payroll company unfortunately has to turn around and say, no, it wasn't us, it was you. So everybody looks at the risks in their silo, and then they evaluate those risks.
So you've mentioned being too small, or the perception of being too small, and you've also talked about large public enterprise organizations. Why is it important for any of these organizations to perform a cyber risk assessment, and how often when we're talking about varying degrees of complexity in an environment?
Well, if you had a lawyer in the room, the first thing they would say is that you have liability. So personally identifiable information, which is credit card information, Social Security, addresses, things like that, of that nature. So if a company holds PHI or PII, and that gets out into the public domain, they have liability. So that's the first. It doesn't matter what size you have.
So PHI or PII for our audience.
Protected healthcare information and personally identifiable information. So protected healthcare information is when you're transmitting information to your healthcare provider about a claim or something, about any diagnosis, any illness of any nature. PII is that personally identifiable information that a company retains on their customers normally, or their employees, Social Security numbers, addresses, and things like that. The neat thing about PII is that last time I checked, it had 51 different definitions, depending on which state or territory you're involved in. So to understand what your compliance is associated with that is important. And it's not where you reside as a business, it's where your customer resides. So let's say I have a very small e-commerce business. I've chosen to take credit card information over my website. My website gets hacked. And I have customers in 25 states. I now have compliance responsibilities for those 25 states. And that can be daunting. So one of the reasons why small businesses have to worry about it is they have real liability. The second is I saw statistics that said 75% of all small businesses which had a breach were out of business within 6 months because they don't have the resources. And one thing that every small business can do is to get a cybersecurity insurance policy so that they do have those resources, or they've talked to their accounting firms like Frazier, Deeter, that has a robust forensics group, and you already know your client. You can come in and you can help. You can, first of all, educate your client beforehand, but then if trouble hits, they know who to call. And you, of course, have referrals with law firms and the other people that they need. So it's really important to depend on the third parties you have today that can help you in a cyber incident response.
And you would agree that in the event of a breach, the first call should be to an attorney?
Maybe. So there are different schools of thought. Here are the three schools. First is attorney. The second is your insurance provider. And the third is law enforcement. So the attorneys say, call us first because we need attorney-client privilege. That's extremely important that you get that. If you call your insurance provider, their first question to you is, have you called your attorney yet? And then they'll ask you who your attorney is. Now, what the insurance provider is trying to ascertain is, does your law firm have the technical expertise to handle this? So let's say I'm a small business and I have a family law practice, and maybe they went to one continuing education in cybersecurity. I'm not sure I want that lawyer handling this. My cyber insurance firm may say, hey, you live in Atlanta, there are a number of large law firms here with excellent expertise, or wherever you live across the country, there are always large law firms. I know this person, you call this person. But that's usually the first question they ask. Law enforcement is a little bit different. Law enforcement is if you accidentally wire money to the wrong person. Your first calls should be first to your bank. I've been hoodwinked. I think I wired money to the wrong person. And the other is the FBI or Secret Service because they share information. But the reason why you call them is they can go to the Treasury Department, and they might be able to get your money back where the bank can't. Normally, and I've heard this thrown around, between 48 and 72 hours, if you realize that you have inadvertently wired money, law enforcement or your bank can retrieve some or all of those funds. Not always all of them. And then immediately call your lawyer or your insurance company. And by the way, your lawyer's first or second question to you should be, have you called your insurance company? So they work in tandem, but I go for the insurance company only because they can bring more resources to bear quicker.
So I don't think we answered the question, why is it important to perform one and how often? Why is it important to, we did talk about why it's important to perform one. So let me ask how often. So let's go back to how often should an organization be performing a cyber risk assessment? You touched on the key types of data that are at risk: financial, credit card, health, personally identifiable. Knowing this, how often should an organization perform a cyber risk assessment if they are not dealing with or have access to the types of data that we talked about earlier?
The number of electronic touch points in a business change rapidly. The easy answer is at least annually, but I would also say if you make any significant changes to your business, let's say I was not conducting e-commerce and now I am, and it's only been 6 months, I would perform a risk assessment on my e-commerce and then see how that interacts with the rest of my business. So at least annually, you should be performing a cyber risk assessment earlier if your business model changes. Or you allow people to start bringing Alexas and Siris and Echoes into work. That would also be something you would turn and say, what risk have we now taken into our company?
Good point, Jack. So what is a cybersecurity incident response plan, and can an organization be too small to have one of those?
So cyber incident response plan is your game plan. It covers several areas. First, planning. We plan for one. And then what we're going to do when we detect one. Then how we're going to resolve that problem. And there are fancy words that are used for that section. Then how we recover and how we learn from it. So it's a game plan, and every company needs one, small or large. So it's what you're going to do in the event of a a cyber breach and who does what. It assigns, there are two very important pieces to this plan. One, the responsibilities, who does what. The other is an escalation matrix, and that's the when do they do it. So there have been some very well-known breaches, some very large ones, where the breach occurred and IT informed the CEO, and then the CEO didn't inform management for over 100 days. The ideal matrix would be IT finds a problem, they go to middle management, senior management, they see they have a problem, then it escalates up to executive management. In small businesses, we don't have those tiers. So it goes from IT right to executive management, who then turns around and they have to find the resources to help handle the problem. We need somebody to run the business day to day. We don't want everybody involved running a cyber incident response. And we need the CEOs to be clear-headed enough because their role is strategy, brand and reputation, and risk mitigation from a very macro level. And that's true for whether you're a small business or a large business. So you need either a staff that can help you, or you need to have trusted advisors who can step in and help you deal with these issues. But the cyber incident response plan is that game plan that you're going to use. And you actually test it and you run scenarios. What happens? We lost a laptop that wasn't encrypted. What do? We accidentally sent our personnel file to my entire Rotary Club. What do? And you run through these problems. Or we've had business email compromise where we accidentally wired money. Who do we call? Do we have the number for the local law enforcement? Do they know who we are? Do they know who our customers are? So those are the things that you walk through the problem, and it's true as in any crisis management. You plan for the event, and then you train for the event, and then hopefully when the event happens, you're adapting, you're not learning.
Well, we can test the effectiveness. We can test our plan, but how do we know it's effective? Particularly when we're somewhat limited to the types of incidents that we could be dealing with.
So there are two ways to find out if your plan's effective. One is to have a breach and see just how well it goes. I don't recommend that. That's
Probably
usually
not the
probably not the best one. The other is to have somebody come out and take a look at your plan ahead of time. The AICPA, within the last year, has come out with a cybersecurity attestation standard. And what it does is it has management tell the CPA firm that conducts these services what their plan is and what protocols they're using. We mentioned NIST, but there's also ISO, and there's some called COBIT, and hospitals use something called High Trust. There are all these protocols. You can make up your own, don't recommend it, but somebody follows it. And the accounting firm comes in and they'll say, hey, given what you've told us, and we've come in and we've taken a look, and we look at a lot of different plans, and here's where we would tweak it, or here are the suggestions we have. And more importantly, here's something you can give your vendors and your customers when they ask you about cybersecurity. So the best way you know, and we talked about testing, we run tabletop exercises, and there's usually an IT component, whoever you use for your IT resources. We actually, as we move our testing into more mature phases, we include outside counsel. We include the forensic firm that you're going to employ. And what we do is we say, look, sometime in this period of time, we're going to run a test exercise, Mr. Law Firm or Ms. Law Firm, and we're going to call you up. And we just want to let you know that we're going to have this test. And the reason why you don't tell them when you're going to have the test is what happens if the one contact is out that day? How's your law firm going to react? So those are the types of things, because crises and cybersecurity risk never happen on your timetable. It's always on somebody else's.
Right. Appreciate your perspective, Jack. Can you tell us about Bear Hill Advisory Group and how you help your clients?
Bear Hill Advisory Group works with third parties to help assess the cybersecurity readiness of a company or organization. And we do this in several ways. We'll work with your company to provide a cybersecurity risk assessment, and that's a guided self-assessment. will then either review the cybersecurity incident response plan that you have, or will help you develop a cybersecurity incident response plan. We then work with your third-party partners. So in IT, it might be a big company like SecureWorks or Verizon, or it could be a smaller boutique. We work with that firm to see how they plug into your plan. We'll then go work with your forensic firm like Frazier, Deeter, and see how they plug into your plan. And then all the professionals get together along with your organization, and we document this plan, and then we'll test the plan. We'll run a tabletop exercise. And then eventually we report to the board of directors, because most board of directors want to know what's going on in their business. And either management wants the board to know, or the board is dictating to management that they want this. So in almost every incident, we usually have a time with the board, a lunch and learn of some sort, to say this is what management has done, here's our incident response plan, and board members, here's your role in that response plan. Just think about it. If you're on the board of a company, small, large, private, and a cyber incident response plan, wouldn't you like to know when you're going to be notified? Are you going to hear about it on the news? Are you going to hear about it third hand? Or is the CEO responsible to call somebody? If so, whom? And usually it's the head of the audit committee or head of the risk, and then that board member's responsibility is to talk to the other board members. So again, it's a plan. As we talked earlier, it's roles and responsibility. Who says what and when? Who does what and when? And we get it all on a piece of paper and orchestrated like almost like a play.
Well, thank you, Jack Healey, again, the CEO of Bear Hill Advisory Group. We appreciate your insight. And for our audience, thank you for listening to Frazier and Deeter's Culture of Compliance podcast. Please join us for our next episode as we continue to discuss transforming various compliance requirements into investments in your business.